The Fifth Head of Cerberus by Gene Wolfe, published in 1972, is a book that I went into with a laser focused and a fine-toothed comb because I've read Gene Wolfe before and I know the kind of antics that he gets up to, and I'm really glad that I adopted this approach because this ended up being one of the most rewarding, one of the most satisfying, and one of the most engaging reading experiences that I've ever had. It's a collection of 3 individual but interconnected novellas revolving around the twin planets of Saint Anne and Saint Croix, or Saint Croix. You'll have to forgive my French pronunciation there. But anyway, these 2 planets were discovered and colonized by French explorers many generations ago. On Saint Anne, the French colonists encountered a race of shape-shifting alien beings, which they supposedly wiped out, although some people believe that they actually killed their colonizers and assumed their forms. Now living on St. Anne, having essentially mimicked humanity so well that they have forgotten their true origin, their true nature, and now actually believe themselves to be human. And that's where the central mystery of this book stems from. Are the inhabitants of this planet people, or are they aliens disguised as people? The first novella is titled The Fifth Head of Cerberus and is set on Saint Croix, where we're following a young boy who is living in this enormous, sprawling manor house along with his brother, and this house actually appears to double up as a highly exclusive brothel. The 2 boys are cared for by a cybernetic robot called Mr. Millions, who is responsible for their education, with their father and aunt seeming to be highly notable individuals who are shrouded in mystery. Not too much of a spoiler to say that their father is involved in cloning in some way, confining himself to this hidden laboratory in the manor to work on these strange experiments, and their aunt is seemingly responsible for that theory that the French colonizers were replaced by the indigenous people on St. Anne. And there's another really important character who threads these 3 novellas together called John Marsh, who is this anthropologist who claims to be from Earth, who is visiting the boy's aunt because he is interested in that theory in some way. I'm not really going to talk too much about the plot or the characters here because honestly, I don't want to ruin for you what has been an incredible reading experience for me, but also I think it would take me a really long time to do a deep dive into this story and all of its obscurities and mysteries. But anyway, in this first story, I'm reading very closely and I'm picking up on various bits and pieces, but honestly, not finding it to be too difficult. So I thought that maybe the level of scrutiny that I was going into this book with was going to be excessive in the end. But then you get to the second novella, which is titled A Story by John V. Marsh. And John Marsh is obviously that anthropologist that I spoke about a second ago. And this story is more like a historical fable or a tribal myth, as it's told from the perspectives of these indigenous people on St. Anne, showcasing some interesting traditions and introducing symbology and biological detail about these beings that ends up forming an incredibly important toolset for deconstructing this puzzle box of a book. And with that toolset starting to assemble, you get into the third and final novella titled VRT, which is effectively, and I'm keeping this purposefully vague by the way, somebody going through a series of jumbled, fragmented, and incomplete journal entries which detail John Marsh's expedition to St. Anne to seek out any remaining indigenous beings, where he's being guided by a father and son who are claiming to be descendants of those people. This is probably where the most uncertainty is introduced, with moments that can be interpreted in many ways or even completely missed if you're not paying very careful attention, depending on what you've picked up from the previous two novellas. Like I mentioned, because I've read Wolfe before, I managed to pick up a decent amount of keys along the way to start opening some of these locks. And after I set this one down, I just felt completely in awe of how somebody could construct something like this in the way that Wolfe has, which is so finely poised, so delicately balanced, and so intriguing throughout. And honestly, I've not really stopped thinking about it since I read it about 2 weeks ago now, and I think it will stay with me for quite a long time, actually. So you sometimes hear that annoying mantra surrounding Wolfe, that you haven't read Wolfe until you've reread Wolfe. And honestly, even though I think I got a pretty good handle on this one, and I have all of these theories and speculations whizzing around in my mind, I do think that I would glean even more if I went through it again. Now, clearly, I loved this, and it might be my favourite read of the year so far. It might actually end up becoming one of my favourite reads of all time, depending on how it sits in my mind. But it's definitely not going to be for everyone, just because of the way he has structured it, where it requires a bit more effort from the reader, a bit more attention, a bit more perception. And if that sounds like the sort of experience that you would enjoy, then I urge you to give this one a go. And also, I should mention, when I say that I've read Wolfe before, I should mention that I've only read The Shadow of the Torturer and not the entirety of the Book of the New Sun, which, yeah, I know, I haven't got the full picture on the Book of the New Sun from only reading the first volume of it. And I definitely need to continue, especially after reading and enjoying this one so much. But for now, I'm feeling like I prefer The Fifth Head of Cerberus, which has also become one of my favourite book titles of all time. Oh, and by the way, I don't think I've ever mentioned it or shown it on this channel, but I do actually own the folio edition of the Book of the New Sun, which comes in this really great set of 2 volumes with some brilliant illustrations inside. And I am wondering now if I should do a dedicated video showing this off and 1 or 2 other folio editions that I have. The next book that I read was Nova by Samuel R. Delany, published in 1968. And this is a space opera story which has this sort of flashy, and the word that comes to mind for me is glittering style, where we're following a spaceship captain called Lork von Ray, who has become obsessed with seeking out a nova, which is where a star erupts into an extremely bright explosion, increasing in brightness sometimes to the amount of thousands of times brighter than the original star was, which is not to be confused with a supernova. And the reason that he is obsessed with tracking down a nova is that he believes that he can extract from it enormous amounts of this extremely scarce fictional element called Illyrion, I think, which is used as a power source in this galactic society. And if he got his hands on the amount of Illyrion that he is speculating that he can from this nova, it would completely destabilize the galactic economy, unseating his rival and the Von Ray's competing family, the Reds. He assembles an eclectic crew, including a guy called the Mouse, a young gypsy who has this bizarre instrument called the syrinx or the syrinx, which conjures up musical, illusory, sensory experiences. We've also got an artistic individual called Katin, who is attempting to write a novel which at this time has essentially become a dead art form. We've then got a man called Sebastian, who keeps these exotic alien pets, and a woman called Ty, who performs tarot readings, among others. And this sort of crew assembly initially made me think of things like Treasure Island, and potentially even shades of Moby Dick, with Von Ray seeking out his white whale in the form of this great white explosion. But Delany is also folding in elements of mysticism with recurring motifs such as the tarot readings, the story of the Holy Grail, and Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece. I would say that initially I struggled to connect with this one, but by the end of it I did come around and I ended up enjoying it. And I think that I read that Delany was 25 when he wrote Nova, and I can recognise his skill and talent, even though I didn't quite love this one. And I think he achieved more with his 1966 novel Babel 17, because even though it does have that sparkly feeling of Delany strangeness, it does very much feel in line with the science fiction traditions of the time, which I personally found to be a little bit disappointing given what I've read and what I've heard about Samuel Delany. But from some research, it does seem like his later works are much more ambitious, and maybe he potentially ends up flying too close to the Nova. But I will definitely be reading some more Samuel R. Delany, so if you've got any recommendations about where to go next with his work, please do let me know in the comments. Both of these books are present on Science Fiction, the 100 Best Novels list by David Pringle that I'm reading through on the channel, and I would say that there have been times with this where I've started to lose faith in it, I've started to question the list, and I've even considered completely abandoning this challenge. But after these two reads, I feel rejuvenated and I have sort of shaken off those doubts for now. There will be books in here that I won't like, I think that's inevitable, but hopefully there are more like these two along the way and less like The Wanderer or Limbo, which is a book that I haven't spoken about yet, but I am working up to a review of that one sometime in the next few weeks. Am I in danger of venturing too far into the Gene Wolfe cult? Have you read either of these two books? And if so, let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching, liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one.